Good morning. This is Shazia Waters, the Pennsylvania Department of Education. I am pre-recording this webinar for you to be able to view it in preparation for our question and answer session on February 15th, and an email broadcast will be going out to all PIMS administrators. Let me turn that up. Hopefully you can hear me better. I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to view this webinar today for the Spring Keystone Precode Internal Snapshot in PIMS. This presentation is going to be recorded, as you know, because you're listening to it, and posted. It can be downloaded from the website, www.education.pa.gov/PAS. Today's agenda, before we begin, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about us. The Division of Performance Analysis and Reporting is part of the Bureau of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. PAR, Performance Analysis and Reporting, is responsible for collecting and reporting assessment data for the PSSA and Keystone exams. All the PIMS trainings listed in the 2016-17 PIMS calendar will be conducted by the Division of Performance Analysis and Reporting. Today's agenda will cover the timelines, the due dates, and the templates needed to complete this internal snapshot. Then we'll talk about the business rules, the data element details, and finally the reports. So who submits data to PIMS? Any entity providing educational services is an educating entity. Educating entities include school districts, charter schools, IUs, CTCs, PRRIs, APS, and SJCI. Education entities are responsible for ensuring that all students taking a course that culminates in a Keystone exam in grades 3 through 12 from whom the entity is providing educational services are assessed. Student demographic information is required for students testing online or testing paper-pencil. To prevent educating entities from having to provide student demographic information by hand bubbling information on answer booklets or submitting it one student at a time for online testers, educating entities can submit this data via PIMS to allow for the production of precode labels for test setup sessions. By uploading into the PIMS files, educating entities will be spared of extensive work during the administration of the assessment. Lessons learned from last year and that may help educating entities this year. Please work with your SIS vendor to make sure they can deliver the data required in this internal snapshot. This includes checking your default settings. Although data is not required, we recommend using the sandbox as a tool to test data against the DQE rules. PIMS administrators who waited until the last day to upload data and encountered problems were not able to meet the deadline. Since there are no extensions, data was unable to be submitted for the upload, which means the educating entity did not get precode labels, and their booklets had to be hand bubbled, and test session setups had to be entered one student at a time. So we strongly encourage PIMS administrators to update data in the sandbox ahead of time, but want to be clear that you must load the data into PIMS production in order for it to be available in the snapshot. The deadline for submitting data for this collection is 12 p.m. noon on March 2nd, 2017. After 12 p.m. noon on March 22nd, 2017, PIMS will shut down and data cannot be uploaded or included in the internal snapshot. There are pre-snapshot warning and verification reports that will be available in the sandbox and in Cognos prior to noon on March 22nd, 2017. Submitting correct data. In order to submit the correct data, PIMS administrators must first identify the students who are taking the Spring Keystone exams and load them for this internal snapshot. In field 215, educating entities should code the student with a valid value other than Z to get a precode label. Then the educating entity should upload students who are taking the spring Keystone exams so that data for Precodes can be sent to DRC for generating Precode labels and setting up test sessions. There are 3 templates: student, school enrollment, and programs fact that need to be updated and uploaded in Collection Window 6 to make sure that the data passes the DQE rules. Also, it's important that PIMS administrators verify that data has been successfully uploaded by running verification reports. Excuse me. PIMS administrators are also encouraged to run the preliminary ACS, or Accuracy Certification Statement, report before the data that is in that report is the data that PIMS shows as uploaded for the educating entity. It will be too late to change data if the PIMS administrator waits to run the final ACS after the due date. The deadline is reiterated here. Final data must be uploaded by 12 p.m. noon on March 2nd, 2017. Please note that data cannot be corrected after the internal snapshot deadline. This is the assessment and accountability data flow. This is a complex process, and we will discuss it in smaller sections. It is beneficial to understand this complex process because it shows how the assessment data that begins with the educating entity submitting data to PIMS ends with the accountability reporting. Numbers 1 through 6 describe the precodes and testing process, while 7 through 10 deal with accountability. So we begin with the educating entity submitting data to PIMS using the student, school enrollment, and programs fact template as you see in number 1. Then in number 2, PIMS takes an internal snapshot of the statewide data set and sends the file to DRC. This file is uploaded into DRC's eDirect system. Once the data is loaded into DRC's eDirect system, this next section describes the actions that occur between the educating entity and DRC. Although you as the PIMS administrator are not directly involved in this process, it can have disastrous results if you, the PIMS administrator, have not loaded data into PIMS correctly. In number 3, someone from your educational entity who is involved with assessments, generally your district assessment coordinator or DAC, will access DRC's enrollment system to indicate the number of test booklets needed for paper pencil testers and the number of students who are testing online. Students who are taking the paper pencil assessment will need Precode labels for their tests. Student information contained on the Precode label comes from the data you, as the PIMS administrator, provide to PIMS. Number 4 deals with test sessions. All students taking the test must be set up for a test session. There are 5 items required in order for your assessment coordinator to set up test sessions. The first is the assessment subject, whether that's Algebra 1, Literature, or Biology. The student name, the mode, paper pencil or online, needs to be indicated. The test session name, this is the name that the LEA or educating entity decides and labels for each test session. And lastly, the name of the teacher. Only the student name and demographics are taken from the PIMS information that you, the PIMS administrator, provide to PIMS. If that information has not been submitted to PIMS, your district assessment coordinator is inputting this student, one student at a time. Special note, your assessment coordinator is responsible for setting up the test sessions. This does not happen automatically. Shifting gears and moving to paper pencil testers, we move on to number 5, where DRC sends booklets and Precode labels to the educating entity. Next, the test is administered, and the educating entity returns the test materials to DRC as shown in number 6. DRC then scores the assessments, which then moves us into the next section of this complex process of the accountability part of this data flowchart. Accountability begins after the booklets are scored. The the students who tested are loaded into DRC's eDirect system and matched to the educating entity's PIMS accountability data. Because the focus of this webinar is PIMS Precode data, we will present the last steps of this flowchart in the webinar dedicated to accountability. That webinar will take place in March and April of 2017. This concludes the explanation of the Assessment and Accountability Data Flowchart for this webinar. For this presentation, the Spring Keystone Precode, slides 8 and 9 are relevant. We'll now move into the business rules related to the Spring Keystone Precodes. We just talked about the accountability file, and this presentation is about the Precode file. But the two files are eventually matched, so it's important that the Precode upload passes the DQE rules. Records may be rejected because they do not meet the current business rules. Please refer to slide 16 for more criteria that are used to determine if a student record is included in the DRC file. Current business rule number 1. A student reported as enrolled in grades 3 through 12 in a Keystone Trigger course are designated in PIMS by the educating entity. The student does not have to complete the course in order to take the Keystone exam. If the student is near the end of the course, the student should take the Keystone exam. Trigger courses are designated by the educating entity. PDE does not mandate the course that culminates in a Keystone exam. Number 2, a student record must include the student's first name, last name, birth date, and PA Secure ID. These 4 criteria are especially essential to the matching of the accountability file. Continuing with the business rules, the third business rule, if there are any special characters other than numbers, dashes, and apostrophes, it will cause a mismatch in the DRC system, and the educating entity will have to manually match each student. A word of caution when looking forward into the accountability file, if the student does not appear in your PIMS accountability file, but does appear in the DRC system as having taken the test, the student cannot be matched. This is because all test records must match to the PIMS accountability file, and no students can be added to the attribution system. Rule number 4, the student is school age. That means the student should be within the age range of 6 and 21. Business rule number 5 is new. The student's school district state entry dates are correct and valid. I want to emphasize the reason for the business rule number 5. Last year, we had educating entities that entered school district state entry dates that were in the future, which caused all those students to not be included in the accountability file later in the school year. This caused the student to have a test record, but could not be matched to a PIMS record. To prevent that from happening again, PDE has now made this a DQE rule. Business rule number 6 is covered in several slides and discusses how students or records are unduplicated and the educating entity that will receive the Precode label. Business rule number 6, parts A and B, primarily address students in part-time and full-time CTCs. We begin with 6A, which states that if a student is reported by an occupational CTC, part-time, and one or more educating entities of any type, the record submitted by the other educating entity will receive the Precode label, because it is the other educational entity that is providing the educational services for the subjects assessed. 6B says that if a student is reported by a comprehensive CTC or full-time and a school district or charter school, then the comprehensive CTC will receive the Precode label because it is the comprehensive CTC that is providing the educational services for the subjects assessed. A word about CTCs. Historically, occupational CTCs operate part-time programs with the understanding that the core subjects, including Keystone courses, are taught at the sending educating entity, and that comprehensive CTCs are full-time programs that teach the core subjects at the CTCs. We realized that both types of CTCs now teach full and part-time programs, so there is not a business rule that can be applied that accounts for occupational CTCs who want labels. Therefore, occupational and comprehensive CTCs where Keystone-related courses are not taught, or are taught, where Keystone-related courses are taught, cannot use PIMS to get precode labels based on Rule 6A and 6B. Continuing with Business Rule 6 for unduplicating student records. 6C states that if a student is reported by an IU and one or more educating entity, then the records submitted by the IU will be used for precode labels and setting up online test sessions. To ensure that the IU receives the labels, the sending educating entity must use code Z in field 215, and the IU will submit a valid value in field 215. If the educating entity indicates that the student is testing, they will receive the precode label. 6D states that if a student is reported by a charter school and one or more school districts, then the charter school receives the precode label and setting up online test sessions. 6E says that if a student is reported by an APS and one or more school district, charter school, or CTC, then the APS will receive the labels and setting up online test sessions. Continuing with Business Rule 6 for unduplicating student records. 6F explains that if a student is reported by a PRRI and one or more educating entity, then the PRRI will receive the record for precode labels and online test session setup. 6G is if multiple school districts submit a record for the same student, then the district with the most recent district entry date will be used for precode labels and online test setup sessions. 6H is if multiple charter schools submit a record for the same student, then the charter school with the most recent entry date will be used for precode labels and online test setup sessions. This completes the 6 business rules for the Precode internal snapshots. In addition to the current business rules in slides 12 through 15, let's discuss how data is either included or excluded in the DRC Precode file based on the data that the PIMS administrator submits to PIMS. This flowchart asks a series of questions that show you what data is essential in the PIMS upload if a student record is to be included in the DRC file. We begin with the educating entity at the top left of the slide and ask the question: did the educating entity upload data to PIMS using the student, school enrollment, and program fact templates? If no, then the student is not included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC, which means the student will not receive a precode label, the booklet will have to be hand bubbled, and online test setup sessions will have to be loaded one student at a time. If the answer is yes, then the educating entity uploaded the data to PIMS, then the next question is, did the data pass the DQE rules? If no, then the educating entity will have to upload the data again into PIMS. If yes, then the next question is, did the school enrollment template include the student? If no, then the student is not included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC, which means that the student will not receive a precode label, the booklet will have to be hand bubbled, and online test setup sessions will have to be loaded one student at a time. If yes, then we move to the next question. Are the school district state entry dates within the valid date ranges? If no, then the student is not included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC, which means the student will not receive a precode label, the booklet will have to be hand bubbled, and the online test setup sessions will have to be loaded one student at a time. If yes, then we move to the next question. Is field 215 in the student template coded with a valid value? Note, proceed to no if code Z is used. If no, then the student is not included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC, which means the student will not receive a precode label, the booklet will have to be hand bubbled, and online test setup sessions will have to be loaded one student at a time. Please note that if the PIMS administrator enters code Z, meaning not participating in any assessment, then the answer to this question is no, and precodes will not be generated. If yes, then we move on to the next question. Is the student coded with location code 9999? If yes, then the student is not included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC, which means the student will not receive a precode label, the booklet will have to be hand bubbled, and online test setup sessions will have to be loaded one student at a time. If no, then the next question that needs to be answered is the student enrolled in an occupational CTC? If yes, then the student will be reported by the other educating entity. Other is defined as an educating entity of any other type. See notes on slide 14 for more details. If no, then we move on to the next question. Is the student at a comprehensive CTC, IU, PRRI, APS, or location code 0000, charter school, or school district? If yes, the student will be reported at the educating entity that is uploading the data, which means that the student will be included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC. A precode will be generated, and an online test session will not have to be uploaded one student at a time. If no, then we move on to the next question. Does the student's district code of enrollment match the code for the educating entity that's uploading the data? If no, then the student is not included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC, which means that the student will not receive a precode label, the booklet will have to be hand bubbled, and the online test setup sessions will have to be loaded one student at a time. If yes, then the student will be reported at the educating entity that's uploading the data, which means that the student will be included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC, a precode will be generated, and/or an online test session will not have to be set up one student at a time. Note, the reporting educating entity can list an entity other than itself as the educating entity if there is a special ed referral. For example, but it should amount to a small subgroup of your students. If all your students are uploaded to be placed outside the reporting educating entity, then the student is not included in the precode file that will be sent to DRC. If you are the educating entity, you want to receive precode labels, you must upload the student with your district code of enrollment that designates you as the educating entity. This is extremely important. Last year, we had an instance where an entire educating entity data was not included in the DRC file because that entity used district code of enrollment as being another educating entity, which means the student records could not be matched to the reporting educating entity's PIMS accountability file. The students appeared in the student template in PIMS, but were filtered out because of the incorrect use of district code of enrollment. This is a quick overview of an internal snapshot. Educating entities upload templates to ensure that their student-level data passes the DQE rules. Next, the educating entities use pre-snapshot reports and run the preliminary ACS before PIMS locks down after 12 p.m. noon on March 2nd, 2017. After that time, PIMS will lock down and an internal snapshot will be taken. It's important to note that after the deadline, when PIMS locks down, no data can be submitted or changed. Once the snapshot is taken, a file is prepared for DRC to generate precode labels. Since this is an internal snapshot, there is no corrections window that would normally follow a data collection window. An internal snapshot freezes data at a point in time, and that's why PDE cannot give any extensions. If data is uploaded after the internal snapshot, it will not be included in the file to DRC, and precodes will not be generated, which means that booklets, will have to be hand bubbled, and online test sessions will have to be uploaded manually, one student at a time. Now we can look at the details of the data elements that are important in this internal snapshot. It begins with the student represented here by the blue circle, which includes the student's four matching criteria, surrounded by the student surrounding the students components of the student that make up the student demographics, the program participation, and the school enrollment as reported in PIMS by the PIMS administrator. It's very important that the four matching criteria, first name, last name, birth date, and PA Secure ID, are correct because these basic data fields identify the student, and this is how the student is initially linked to test results later in the year. This is why there's so much emphasis on getting these fields right. Most of these fields are now part of the DQE rules when you submit data to PIMS. This year, the DQE will check last name, birth date, and PA Secure ID, as well as other DQE rules. Please refer to current business rules on slide 12 to make sure that the student's four matching criteria meet the requirements. Sometimes there are students with similar names like Jan, Jane, and Janet as the first name with the same last name. Sometimes names are abbreviated, where Robert could be listed as Bob or Rob, or a student's name could be hyphenated in the PIMS file, the educating entity's student information system, and or the PA Secure ID system. DRC matches the first two characters in the first name and all characters in the last name in the initial matching process. A student's birth date must indicate that the student is school age, which is ages 6 through 21. Sometimes there are instances where there is one PA Secure ID for multiple students or multiple PA Secure IDs for one student. Please go into the PA Secure ID system and make sure the data for the student uniquely identifies that student. For the precodes, if data is incorrectly printed on the precode label, the booklet will have to be hand bubbled, or the online test session will have to be set up manually, one student at a time. If the erroneous precode label is used on the answer booklet, and if the educating entity corrected the student data reported in the accountability file upload later in the school year, the student test record will not match. This means that the student record will be placed in the educating entity's accountability file to make a manual match. If educating entities will use the data reported in PIMS as well as their SIS to match the student, this is why the student demographics are so important. The demographics for each student are embedded in precode labels or test tickets. If the student cannot be matched using the four matching criteria, these demographics can help you or someone in the educating entity to identify students in the attribution window. Some important demographics found in the student template are students identified as having an IEP, English learners, economically disadvantaged students, as well as the student's race and ethnicity. The first three are used in the SPP to report the historically underperforming subgroup, or HUS. HUS are an unduplicated count of students who have IEPs, are ELs, or who are economically disadvantaged. we use race ethnicity as subgroups for federal reporting. There are many changes in the student's demographics from one upload to another, such as economically disadvantaged and IEP status. Also, please note that race ethnicity is self-reported, and although it is not likely, it can change. Educating entities should report the student demographics at the time of the present upload. Another demographic that has become increasingly more important is grade. Another part of matching the student to the test record, when the student record does not match on the four matching criteria of first name, last name, birthday, and PA Secure ID, is by collecting data from the program's fact template, which shows program participation. This comes from the second template needed for the Spring Keystone Precodes upload. This is where Title I information is collected using valid values of 015 through 015 to be included as part of the student's demographics. For this upload, please include both individual and school-wide program participation. Title I information is collected and used for reporting federal designations in accountability reporting. The third template needed for PSSA Precode upload is the school enrollment template because it is used to track student entry and withdrawal from the educating entity. An entry date must be entered when a student is being educated by you. If the student leaves, a withdrawal code is entered showing that the student is no longer being educated at your entity. The school enrollment template also tracks a student's grade or school building, such as moving from an elementary school to the middle school, which is designated by using withdrawal code WD05, which is student changes school or grade within the school year. For accountability, PDE uses the student test results for the calculation of performance and participation if the student has full academic year status. Entry and withdrawal dates help PDE calculate full academic year status based on the dates entered by the educating entity. The definition of full academic year, which is used for accountability, is the student who is enrolled on or before October 1 of the current school year and remains continuously enrolled as of the last day of the testing window for the Keystone testing window in Algebra 1, Biology, and Literature. Here are two examples. The last day of the testing window for the 2017 Spring Keystone exams will be May 26, 2017. First example, if a student with an E01 code and entry date of September 1, 2016, and no withdrawal code or WD code on the last day of the Keystone testing window of May 26, 17, would be considered to have met the definition of full academic year because the student entered the school on or before October 1 and was continuously enrolled as of the last day of the Keystone testing window. In this case, the student's results will be used for accountability reporting. The second example is if a student had an entry date of E01 dated September 1, 2016, paired with a withdrawal code of WD01 dated January 2, 2017, it would show that the student was not enrolled for a full academic year since the student did not remain enrolled until the last day of the testing window, May 26, 2017. If a student changes school buildings within a school year and uses withdrawal code WD05, it will not be factored into making the determination of full academic year status. The only combinations PDE considers as valid are entry code of E01 paired with a withdrawal code between WD01 through WD09, with the exception of WD05. These can be found in Appendix E of the PIMS Manual, Volume 2. WD05, student changes school or grade within the school year, is not considered when we make a determination of a student's continuous enrollment calculation that shows if a student was enrolled for a full academic year. Enrollment data is used to determine if a student was educated for a full academic year. we discussed how the school enrollment template is used to calculate full academic year status. FAY status is crucial to accountability reporting. The test results and test participation of the student who is full academic year are used in reporting on the School Performance Profile, the SDP, and the Required Federal Reporting Measures, RFRM. Last year, PDE began using school enrollment as the denominator for the calculation of participation rate. This is consistent with how participation rate is calculated for the Keystone exams. It also meets state audit requirements for the state to show that every eligible student tested in the required assessments. The slide shows that when accurate enrollment data is submitted to PIMS, it will be used in the calculation of participation rate. The green arrow shows the participation rate is calculated by taking the number of booklets scored and dividing it by the enrollment, then multiplying by 100 to get a percentage. The target for participation rate is 95%. A participation rate below 95% automatically designates the school as a focus school, which is reported in the federal designations for accountability reporting. Another data field we need to discuss is field 215, assessment participation. This field is used for pre-code purposes by our office. It is not used for accountability. Refer to slide 16 to see how a student record is included or excluded based on the data entered in the student school enrollment and programs fact templates, and slide 23 regarding student, that's not slide 23. In order to get pre-code labels, educating entities must submit data in field 215 and code it with valid value other than Z to identify that the student is taking the spring Keystone exams. If the PIMS administrator enters code Z in field 215, indicating that the student is not participating in any assessment, then no pre-code label will be generated for the student and a test session setup for the student. Field 215 is one factor in determining if the student is included in the file that goes to DRC. Slide 16 provides greater detail. As long as the student record meets the criteria in the flowchart on slide 16, the student will be included in the DRC file, which means that a pre-code label will be generated for the student, or the student can be set up in test session. The school district state entry dates in the student template are also used to determine if a student record is included in the DRC file from the internal snapshot. Refer to slide 16 again for criteria used to determine if a student record is included or excluded in the DRC file. The guidelines for submitting the school district state entry dates are as follows. Number 1, the dates must be in ISO format, which is the 4-digit year followed by the 2-digit month and then the 2-digit day as shown in this slide. These fields cannot be left blank. They are required fields. The dates must fall within the current school year or before. As referenced earlier in this presentation, PDE became aware of cases where school district state entry dates were entered with future dates. This impacts FAY status, or full academic year status, and there is a DQE rule that ensures this does not happen moving forward. The state entry date, which is field 109 in the student template, is the date the student entered a PA public school. The district entry date, which is field 99 in the student template, must be on or after the state entry date. This means that the student must have a district entry date on or after the state entry date. It also means that the school entry date can be on or after the district and state entry dates. Essentially, the student must be in the state and the district on or before he or she can be in the school. The school entry date, which is field 98 in the student template, must be on or after the district and state entry dates. This means the student must have a school entry date on or after the district and state entry dates. The next slides will describe the school district state entry dates in different ways to explain these data fields. This is another way to look at the school district state entry date. The greater than or equal to symbol represents on or after. In simple terms, the school entry date can be on or after the district entry date, which can be on or after the state entry date. There's one more way to emphasize these concepts using dates. Using dates to explain school district state entry dates may be another way of looking at the relationship between these data fields. There are three columns labeled school entry date, district entry date, and state entry date with mathematical symbols in between. Let's take a look at the first row, which shows that the school district and state entry dates can be the same date, September 1st. This could be a student who moves to your district from out of state. The second row shows the student enrolled in the school on October 10th, which was after the district entry date of September 1, and the district and state entry dates can be on or after the same date. This could be a student who comes to your district from another state but cannot start at the school until a later date. The third row represents a student who started at your school on or after the same date as he entered the district. This could be a student from another district who is transferring to your school. The last row shows a student who started at your school after the date they entered the district, which is after the date they entered the state. This could be a student who started at the district in kindergarten and moves from the elementary school to the middle school. Here, the school entry date would be after the district entry date, which would be after the state entry date. We will now talk about some of the reports that are available to PIMS administrators. We will review both Cognos verification and production reports in the next two slides. You can use pre-snapshot verification reports, which are real-time reports, to check your data prior to finalizing it. You can check those students reported at location 9999, which would signal to you that these students will not be included in the file sent to DRC. You can check the students included in your enrollment file by using verification reports 1, 2, and 3, as well as those who have been designated as excluded from your snapshot in verification report number 4. Next, we'll look at the pre-snapshot production reports. There are two sets of reports in production: Precode snapshot reports and Precode reports. We will look at the Precode snapshot reports first. These are a list of Precode snapshot production reports, which are updated twice daily in PIMS. These reports show the contents of your data if it were uploaded and used in the internal snapshot. However, in these reports, you will still have time to update the data as long as it is before PIMS shuts down to take the internal snapshot. These reports are available in the sandbox and can be used before the internal snapshot is taken. There are extract warnings along with preliminary ACS that will show you what data will appear as a result of your upload. If you find errors using these reports and it is before the due date and time of the internal snapshot, you can go back and correct those errors. Although ACS reports are not required to be submitted for Precodes, it is still a good idea to run them to make sure that your data appears as you intended. The preliminary ACS will show you what will appear in the internal snapshot. If errors are not caught in the pre-ACS report, then the ACS will be incorrect. Depending on the error, it could prevent Precode labels from being generated. It's crucial that your data is correct, so please run the pre-ACS report. As mentioned earlier, there are two sets of reports in production. We discussed the pre-snapshot for Precode production reports, and now we will look at the Precode reports in production. The first report is the Precode ACS, which can run after the internal snapshot is taken. The report does not specify that it is for the Keystones because at one point it was used by ELL as well. As stated previously, ACS reports are not required for Precode snapshots. They will be required for the accountability snapshots for the PSSA and Keystones later in the year. The second report is the ACS for the Keystones, which is relevant to our discussion today. The next three reports are extract warning reports that alert you to potential errors when a student may be reported in multiple LEAs, where the reporting district is different from the district of residence, or those students listed with location code of 9999. Students coded with 9999 will not receive labels. Students reported in multiple LEAs will be subject to the unduplicating rules so that the educating entity may or may not receive labels. The next two reports are verification reports, one for the Keystone precodes and one for the PSSA precodes. All the same reports that are available in Cognos are also available in the sandbox, except the pre-ACS is in the sandbox and the final ACS is in Cognos production. All assessments and accountability internal snapshots will be submitted using Collection Window 6. This is open all year, and data can be uploaded, updated, and deleted depending on your permissions. You can update data as often as you like to make data submissions easier. I've listed some resources for you from the PAR Performance Analysis and Reporting webpage, as well as the RFRM and PIMS. All trainings will be posted to the PAR website, which is listed at the top of this slide. Here's contact information for me, my supervisor, John Weiss, and the PIMS Help Desk. So if you have questions related to Precodes, please contact me. For PIMS questions, please contact the Help Desk. And for questions on general assessment questions, please contact John Weiss. This concludes the presentation on the Spring Keystone Precodes for the internal snapshot in PIMS. Thank you.